one of the unique things about the United States standards system is that it is a private, decentralized system and has been for well over a century. Beginning in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, these private technical committees began to emerge to create technical standards to address various, mainly economic needs. So for example, the largest standards development organization in the US today is ASTM International, which was actually started by a chemist for one of the railroad companies. And the problem that he was having is they were trying to buy enough steel to make all of the rails. And you can't get it all from one supplier. No one makes enough steel. You have to get it from multiple suppliers. And in order to ensure the safety and reliability of the rails, you have to have the same chemical composition, the same properties in the steel that you buy, regardless of who you get it from. So this chemist said, okay, we need to get together and come up with a standard for what kind of steel we need so that we can ensure that there's uniformity of product regardless of where we're purchasing our steel from. And that's actually where ASTM International got started. And that was necessary not only to protect the public's health and safety in the railroads. I mean, you don't want one chunk of your rail splitting because it doesn't have the proper chemical properties. Obviously, that could create all kinds of derailments and other dangers. But in addition, it really is necessary for that trade, for the economy to function. You need to have an interoperability and an ability to know that parts are going to be interchangeable in the way they need to be, regardless of who is selling the product in the market. And that gives you the ability to buy the same quality of product. If someone goes out of business, you can find another supplier. That supplier can know, without maybe radically changing their equipment and their manufacturing processes, they are able to sort of step into that void and sell you the product that you need. So standards are incredibly useful for all kinds of purposes. And in the US, they've mostly been created by private organizations. And there are a variety of historical reasons for that. Part of it is because there was quite a dispute over whether or not the federal government should be getting involved in standardization. It's actually in our Constitution, one of the enumerated powers of Congress involves setting the standards for weights and measures. But Congress was actually reluctant to, in the first instance, act on that and create a national standards laboratory like existed in most European nations in order to fulfill those needs. So initially, actually, all of that stuff was done by the states, which created some real problems. So, for example, there were parts of property in Brooklyn that couldn't be taxed because they technically didn't exist because you had multiple standards for measuring the property. And if you used one, it would be a certain size. And if you used a different standard, it would be another size. And there would be a slice of property that wouldn't exist under both of those standards. And so the government found that it wasn't able to tax that property. And it became kind of a national embarrassment. We didn't have a national standards laboratory that was producing a uniform standard for weights and measures. And we didn't have a national standards laboratory that was able to calibrate the equipment necessary for judging and ensuring conformity to standard weight and measures. So we had to send all of our equipment to laboratories in Europe. And eventually it became enough of a national embarrassment that Congress acted and created what was initially referred to as the National Bureau of Standards. Now, today it's called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And even then, they were a little bit tepid in their willingness to sort of enter into the standardization field. Most standards, aside from those for weights and measures, that is standards for manufacturing processes and the characteristics of products and all these other kinds of technical standards that we need for the economy to function and for products to operate safely and interchangeably, were done by private organizations. Now, the government used standards really from the beginning. The Department of Defense used some standards mainly in its procurement starting as early as the World Wars, and there was a significant degree of public-private collaboration and standardization spurred first by the Industrial Revolution and secondly by the needs of the World Wars. But all along there was an imperative to retain sort of the sovereignty of the private standardization system, if you will. And there was a desire to, a desire in industry and a desire in government as well to kind of protect that sphere for private industry, and not just for political reasons, but for very practical reasons. The people who participate in the work of the technical committees in these private standards development organizations are mostly engineers, are people with real technical expertise that doesn't typically exist within the federal government. Agencies are charged with regulating. They're usually making rules to govern how people conduct themselves, whereas technical standards are really about, engineering matters, technical matters, about how things work, right? You need a scientific background, you need a technical background, you need to be an engineer in order to know how best to construct steel so that it won't split apart if it's used in a railway, for example. And so we have always had a very decentralized system where all of those standards are created by these private organizations.